So we have our guest, and I'm excited to have this guest on because now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of the things that are actually important. So Ukraine and Russia have been talking, has been this whole conflict that the US has propagandized a certain way, and we only get certain bits of information here. But Russia has accused the US of trying to push false flag operations on them. And the United States has so much as hinted that they were going to do this. And our guest today is Jonny Kuzmarov, and he writes for Covert Action magazine. And it's a magazine that our friend Gloria is also a part of. And it's a great magazine, lots of great content. You guys should check it out. But Jonny, thank you for coming on and having this discussion with us.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
Okay, so I'm going to start off asking you like a very basic question because you focus much of your writing on false flags and connecting events and connecting things. So let's start with the propaganda surrounding Russia, Ukraine, and how that's been developed, in your opinion.
Sure. Well, I mean, one propaganda, the Bucha incident, that appears to be a very clear false flag that led to passage of this major bill to loosen regulations for arms supplies, right after, very conveniently, in these huge, another round of huge military aid package by the Biden administration that was voted on by all the Democrats. And I mean, if you look into it, I mean, even the mayor, this massacre allegedly occurred when Russian troops were retreating from Bucha, which is a suburb of Kiev. But the mayor said nothing on the day they retreated, March 30th. He said, the city has been liberated. And there were no reports of a massacre. And then there was reports after of a sweep by the Azov battalion to kind of clean it up of any pro-Russian collaborators. And that's when after they're announcing, 400 victims. But then there are these satellite images that came out that only showed 9 victims. They're claiming 400 victims, and there are no eyewitnesses. And the satellite videos are odd. And, the bodies would have been bloated. They claim that these bodies were first there when the Russians were there. And so that proved the Russians did it. But, Scott Ritter analyzed it very closely and said that, these bodies would have been bloated if they were out in the streets for 2 weeks. Any police investigator know they would have been bloated. So they had the appearance of only being there after the Russians had left. So this is one, case that we see very blatantly that they're promoting this narrative of Russian genocide and atrocities to support an escalation of the war, wider U.S. involvement, these huge arms supplies. And, I mean, the whole thing is in a way a false flag. I mean, the Russians were set up for years now. They were provoked. And that, there was, behind the scenes, the U.S. government was manipulating things from supporting the Maidan coup of 2014 to training, the Azov and other militias, to supplying huge amount of weaponry to the Ukrainian army as it attacked eastern Ukraine on Russia's border and committed all kinds of atrocities there. So, that was going on for years and years. But barely reported in the U.S. media, and Russia was constantly being accused of things like even downing this Malaysian airliner jet in 2017, and the evidence pointed more to Ukraine being behind it. Although we don't know all the facts because there's a lot of cover-up, but. So, this incident, among others, looks like, another false flag. And it's all designed to condition the public to see Russia as evil and that we have to go in there militarily. And this could be leading to a, major U.S. military intervention or world war and even nuclear war. It's very, very dangerous.
Let's digress a little bit for a second, because you said something over there that, Ukraine provoked, or at least the government since 2014 has provoked Russia. I've said before that Putin and Russia are 1,000% justified for going in with military actions to make sure that there's not a hostile nuclear entity on their border, one that hates actual Russians. You've done a lot of reporting over there. Is that a fair statement when people say that? Because I do see this kind of footsie being played with some of the independent media of people who want to both sides things and say, oh, I condemn war all around and Putin should have done this. But you used the word provoked. I mean, is that a legitimate statement to say that this is justified?
I think so. I think any country would respond the way Russia would respond. I mean, if the same thing were going on the U.S. border, in Mexico, China or Russia was interfering, sponsoring a coup d'état, sponsoring neo-Nazi regiments, attacking provinces that voted to secede and were very close to your country, encircling you militarily with a hostile military alliance like NATO. I think almost any country in the world would respond the way Russia has. So it's a very sensible position to support the Russian invasion and more defensive. There are arguments that is legal within international law as measure of self-defense. I think there are debates among legal scholars as far as legality, but there is a strong argument that Russia is actually legally justified.
Fam, can I have a quick follow-up?
Yeah, sure.
Is it also justified for Russia to make sure that they take Odessa and the south of Ukraine, cutting them off from the Black Sea after what we just witnessed Ukraine do for the last several years?
Certainly from a Russian point of view. I mean, we're not there on the ground, but it seems clear that a lot of people living in that area favor the Russian side. I mean, I think the Ukrainian population may be divided. The western part of the country is more oriented to west, but I think eastern Ukraine, cities like Odessa, they've experienced the tyranny of the Ukrainian government that was imposed in the 2014 coup. They've experienced massacres like the burning of the trade union building. They've experienced attacks by the Ukrainian army and neo-Nazi regiments and open torchlight parades. So I think a lot of those people of those areas look at the Russians as liberators. And from a Russian point of view, it makes sense strategically to establish a buffer if they're going to annex Donbass and Luhansk and claim territory around the Crimea. It strengthens their country and serves as a kind of buffer against threatening aggression from either Ukraine or the West, which is very real because the Biden administration openly has talked about regime change and weakening Russia. And Putin's been a target because he's a more nationalistic leader compared to his predecessor, Boris Yeltsin. The U.S. clearly wants a kind of patsy like Yeltsin. Navalny seems to be their guy. And Putin is a target of regime change. He knows it. He witnessed what happened in Libya, Syria, and I think he's fearful the same thing would happen in Russia. And Russia, of course, is a very strategic country, huge oil and gas wealth, and the whole region the U.S. wants to control in Central Asia.
Yeah. No, I mean, yeah, it seems like there's I don't know what you think about this, but it seems like there is a globalist fight, right? A globalist takeover by the West, an attempt to have this global surveillance state. Do you think that Russia, particularly Vladimir Putin, is in opposition to that in terms of not just a nationalist type of sense, but an opposition to, say, the plans of the World Economic Forum and the attempt to pretty much globalize this countries into one sort of entity where everything is extremely similar and nation states sort of cease to exist in power?
Well, if you look at the track record of Putin, I think he started out as being very pro-Western and wanted to be in alliance with the West. I mean, there are oppressive features of his rule, but I think he gradually shifted because, to put it bluntly, the West didn't play nice and the U.S. didn't play nice. I mean, the U.S. was extremely aggressive in the region in general and pushing for NATO expansion and pushing for control of the resources of the entire region and pushing regime change. The minute Putin went up against some of the oligarchs that were tied to the West who had looted Russia in the 90s, the minute he stood out against U.S. policy in Iraq and took some more independent stances in line with Russian opinion, that's when the U.S. became hostile towards him and started trying to undermine him through various ways, including through the National Endowment for Democracy was used to support civil society groups that was really opposition groups. through this demonization campaign against him, through the coup in Ukraine. And that's when Putin slowly became more and more assertive in standing up to the United States, allying with China as a kind of counterweight. I mean, I see the Russian-Chinese alliance as a kind of counterweight to U.S. and Western imperialism, and could pave the way towards a more multipolar world order that would probably be more beneficial towards humanity. I mean, if you look at what the One Belt, One Road initiative and all the development projects that China is sponsoring, I think Russia and China are much less imperialistic, aggressive in their relation with other nations. They have far fewer, military bases than the United States. So I see it as more counter to Western empires, which have been dominant since the 1500s.
Yeah. I don't know if you've ever seen The Waterboy, the movie. Have you, Jeremy?
Is that with Adam Sandler? I think a long time ago, yeah.
All right, so
I don't remember all the details.
Okay, well, I'm going to talk about one scene real quick to just kind of set a scene so you can understand what I'm talking about. Towards the very end of the movie, in the last football game of the movie, the Waterboy hadn't showed up yet, and the team was playing without him. And they were just trying anything to do, to try to move the ball and get on the scoreboard. They were getting slaughtered. And there was a scene where they looked across the way, and as they were calling plays, the other coach was looking at Football for Dummies. And it kind of signified that he had the playbook to know exactly what these guys were going to call every single time. Russia's been calling out these false flags. Where did they get the playbook from? How do they know so many times beforehand that the West in Ukraine is going to try something before they even try it?
Well, they know from experience. Yeah, I wrote a book called The Russians Are Coming Again, and it went back 100 years. The U.S. Had been trying to sabotage Russia, the Russian government, since the Russian Revolution, at least, when communist government took place that nationalized the economic resources. The U.S. actually invaded Russia at that time with 6 other Western countries. And really from that time forward, with a brief period of smoother relations under Franklin Roosevelt, I see more a visionary compared to almost every other U.S. leader, the U.S. has been trying to undermine Russia and use every kind of skullduggery and dirty tactics, including after World War II, supporting, familiar playbook of supporting neo-Nazis. In that case, Stepan Bandera and the Organization of Ukraine Nationalists, who had slaughtered the Jews during World War II and the Holocaust. And now again, they're supporting neo-Nazis with the Azov regiment. So, Russia has seen this many times over, and they've, Putin and the circle are smart. I mean, I think the one, Yeltsin was, even Gorbachev was a bit naive, and they let their guard down a little bit. And look what happened in the 90s with NATO expansion. And I think that the U.S. and West saw the opportunity with the demise of the Soviet Union to kind of go for the kill and dominate that region. And Putin woke up to it pretty early in his presidency, and he's trying to, stand up to it in his way.
Well, I think they wanted another Yeltsin because he was a drunk fall down. But one little quick follow-up to that, is it because, too, as well, not just seeing a pattern in this and understanding this, right? Like they've been there for a while, and obviously Putin's a really smart guy, ex-KGB lawyer, whatnot. If you haven't seen the interviews with Oliver Stone, they're amazing. But is it because there are so many Russian speaking people within Ukraine that would also help the intelligence apparatus to get a jump on some of the false flags before they happen?
Yeah, I mean, Russia historically has had very good intelligence, and they're very well attuned to that. Yeah, they've been supporting the rebel groups in Donetsk and Luhansk. So, yeah, they have a presence on the ground that they can catch that. And some are just obvious. Some are being telegraphed right before us. I think the West has grown and U.S. so arrogant that they telegraph what they're going to do. And it's not hard to figure out, but they don't seem to care. And they're never held to account by their own people.
Gotcha.
So in terms of, the false flag operations, you mentioned the Buka, there's also been several other attempts that the media has tried to blame Russia on. But most recently, Russia claims that the U.S. will accuse them of using biological, chemical, and nuclear weapons. And the State Department has hinted at this as much. That several of them have let out little tidbits saying, well, if Russia were to do this, if Russia were to do that, or if there was some sort of, biological, chemical attack, it would definitely be Russia. And they've been putting that out in the media. So Russia has denied that they even have biological and chemical weapons, and they pointed out very astutely that the only country that has had all three is the United States. So what happens next, do you think? Do you think there will be a sort of false flag attempts? I know I constantly read about Russia saying they're looking at this. They might use this. They might use that. They have the civilians. That bodies that they use civilians as human shields and all of that. And they labeled out the three ways that these could potentially happen, from the most likely to the least probable. And do you think this is going to happen? And if so, what do you think happens after that?
Good question. Yeah, I think it's probable. I can't say for sure it'll happen, but I think it's probable that it'll follow the Syrian model, where they blamed Assad. There'll be some kind of attack that was either staged, or like in the Syrian case, there was one attack that it was a conventional bombing that it struck a fertilizer plant. So the air was filled with debris, and it was easily made to look like a chemical weapons attack, even though that never happened. In the other case, it seemed the rebels groups that the CIA was supporting set this up to blame Assad, to engender U.S. military intervention, and it's very likely they'll follow that playbook in Russia, and it'll be used to ratchet up U.S. military intervention further, possibly even full-scale military invasion or bombing, like they did in Syria.
But in terms, I guess, of a follow-up, in terms of the Russians acting on this, right? So let's say they get blamed for X attack. What do you think their action will be? Because the United States has continued pushing the needle on this. They're really pushing the buttons, poking the bear, so to speak, because they have there was a congressman that recently introduced a new AUMF to like unilaterally give Ukraine not just funding but full military support. And so they're like, it seems like some of these people in the State Department are very keen on starting any sort of war, and they think Russia's bluffing when Russia says they would hit back if the United States or the West did something like that.
Well, yeah, I think it's a very dangerous situation, and I think Russia has shown that they will hit back. In way we don't know exactly. And yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Putin Diary. That was a very good film with Oliver Stone. And one thing I remember from watching that, Oliver Stone interviewed Vladimir Putin, and one thing he said was, every action invites a counter reaction, and so they're going to react in some way. How, I don't know, but I mean, it could even lead to a nuclear war. I think that's the ultimate danger. So. I think this is, playing with fire. I mean, this is a very dangerous policy that the U.S. Biden administration is adopting right now.
Let's pivot to J6 because, man, did you write an article that ruffled some feathers? Did you not? Right? So, I enjoyed that. You're talking to two journalists that were at the Capitol on January 6th. We went to educate people on elections because that's what it was. It was a Stop the Steal rally. What are some of the bits of evidence you found through your investigative journalism that show that January 6th could have potentially been a false flag?
Well, I think key evidence centers on this guy, Ray Epps, who's a Marine intelligence officer who is featured, giving an incendiary speech the night before. And then on the morning right before the Capitol barricade was breached, there's a video that shows him whispering in the ear of a guy by the name of Ryan Samsel, who turns out was a criminal who was jailed after this and was actually beaten up badly in jail. It looked like he was threatened, a really bad beating by guards. And Epps had been on the FBI most wanted list, but then was suspiciously taken off that list. When, as you know, a lot of people were being arrested, in some cases given draconian, very long sentences, sometimes simply for being present in the Capitol for half an hour or something, or given like 5-year jail. And, I know one committed suicide. And yet the guy who appears to be a key mastermind, because again, it featured in the video, he whispers in Samsel's ear, then Samsel kicks over the barricade. And that leads to people, storming the Capitol. And I think Trump was still even speaking at that time. So that sequence is very suspicious. Who is Epps? Why was he taken off the FBI most wanted list when they're arresting all these other people? And I think he had even been called out in that video when he spoke at this rally the night before. The audience chanted, Fed, Fed. They knew he was a Fed and informant. And we also know that there were a lot of provocateurs within the Capitol 6 rioters. Many FBI, even the head of the Proud Boys had been an FBI informant. And we know the historical pattern that the FBI infiltrates groups left and right with provocateurs to, I think it's part of, strategy of tension. They want to provoke violence. So the public becomes uneasy and ends up supporting draconian legislation, which tramples on the Bill of Rights and U.S. Constitution that they wouldn't normally support. And there are other suspicious things, that need more investigation, like the suspicious deaths. There are like 4 suicides right after, 4 Capitol Riot police committed suicide right after. That's real odd. And then one woman, they said she died of a drug overdose in the middle of this. It's just some odd things. And then the pipe bombing the night before would indicate, and they never caught the culprit. He was sending pipe bombs to the Democratic and Republican headquarters. I mean, it could be an odd lunatic who somehow got away with it, but more likely it's a coordinated plot. If you remember, after 9/11, they had the anthrax scare. And they used this to scare the public, and the public loses its rational thinking skills and ends up just supporting legislation that's against the public interest and creates ever more of a police state.
Yeah, and that's exactly what happened after, is a domestic violent extremist attempts by the State Department to label anybody that was in opposition to any status quo rule, whether you were an animal rights activist, an environmental activist, or a Proud Boy or whatever. All those labels were now put out to people, and then there was a whole department that was dedicated to finding these people, and we were there. I mean, we saw what it was supposed to be, and we saw then what it turned into, and it was kind of surreal being there and getting images from CNN and from the mainstream media that was there trying to say this was an insurrection, and we saw a completely different side of it, and it really did seem like there were agent provocateurs there, and it's kind of like, once the playbook, I think, of false flags, you can kind of spot them easily. Is there a specific or a quick rundown you can give of what constitutes a false flag, at least in the construct of the United States?
Sure, yeah. I think a false flag would normally be described as some kind of a terrorist attack or riot or crime that's committed by government security forces and provocateur with the aim of blaming an enemy, disguising their role and facilitating this crime. And it's often part of a strategy of tension, designed to get the public to become very fearful or fear a certain group and think there's a huge threat of terrorism, and ends up supporting legislation that usually, like the USA Patriot Act, that tramples on civil liberties and human rights. And I mean, you can look after World War II, though, the Operation Gladio in Europe, where the CIA created these stay-behind armies that staged terrorist attacks, including in Italy, and blamed it on left-wing groups. And it was part of this strategy of tension. Or, you can look within the United States at various events.
Yeah. So, fam, you want to go over to Rokfin real quick, since we asked a couple more questions? We want to ask Jeremy some more questions about the boop boop. We can't do it here on YouTube.
Yeah, we can do that. Just real quick before we do that, I have one quick follow up on that. You talked about I guess this kind of goes along with it. Kind of goes along with it.
We're already talking stuff about J6 and elections today. We're pushing.
Yeah, that's true.
Guys, go over to Rokfin right now, ROKFIN. We're going to leave YouTube because we're going to ask Jeremy some questions that we don't want to get in trouble for over there. So please go to Rokfin right now. Now's the time. We're going to leave YouTube. Thank you for everybody who participated in YouTube today. But like we say, we have to go to our free speech platform. I'm going to see Jilly Love already put the Lincoln. I'm going to tell you this much. I'm going to invite Jeremy on the morning show next week to talk about the Oklahoma City bombing. He wrote a book disguised as an article about it and got all the receipts there. And he's going to come talk about that on the morning show, Anarchy in the Morning, next week, if he has time for us over there. But for right now, what we want you to do is click that link in the chat right over there that Jilly Love and Craig Pasta Jardula put up. That is a link to our Rokfin. We're going to ask Jeremy a couple questions about the boop boop, and we can't.
Unfortunately, guys, we're censored on YouTube if we say the wrong thing. So sorry, Jeremy, but we do have to go to the other platform. You know how it is. Nowadays.
We're leaving YouTube in 5, in 4, in 3. Thank you, everybody who joined today. In 2, we love you, especially you, Jilly Love. In 1, on over to Rokfin and bye, YouTubers.